Hi guys, welcome to Lessons in the Lab. Although we're not in the lab right now, we're on my front porch because it's just too gorgeous of a day to actually be in the lab with no windows and everything. So what we want to talk about today is we want to talk about shock. And we're not talking about the shock that you get like on Price is Right when you win the brand new car or the amazing vacation. We're talking about shock when the body system is failing. And there's lots of reasons people go into shock. I've taken care of several over my years, but I mean, sepsis is one, and we see a lot of huge stuff for sepsis, trying to prevent it because it is one of the most deadly ones. Being a trauma nurse, I've seen a lot of hypovolemic and hemorrhagic shock where people lose the volume. You can have shock from a burn, which would be a shock where you lose a lot of volume because of the third spacing. You can have shock after a heart attack because the pump's not working and you again lose that pressure and you lose that blood volume. So it's really important for us to understand that this is a pathophysiology disease process. Something's going on, and the biggest thing we have to do is we want to make sure that throughout the whole process of someone being in shock that we're maintaining blood flow to the brain, the heart, and the lungs. Those three parts of our body are kind of finicky. If they don't work, the rest of the systems don't work, okay? So there's really two issues when it comes to shock. Two systems or two areas that really need, that get complicated when they're in it. And that's the pump, which is the heart, and the hoses. And that's our blood vessels. So I like to think of this kind of in a two-part situation. So when it comes to the pump or the heart, we want it to be effective. And so I have two water balloons, and you can kind of hear they're sloshy. I'm not faking you out, okay? Which water balloon would be more effective at doing its job? This one. This one's going to be a lot more effective at getting your friend or your sibling wet if you throw it at them. This one's probably going to just bounce off of them and not really do much. This one had more fill time. It's really important that our heart have fill time so that it can adequately pump the volume that it's supposed to be. That's one reason why when we're doing CPR, we go for 100 beats a minute. That allows the heart to have adequate fill time. If we're pumping too much, too fast, we get this one. So it's not pumping adequate volume. It's pumping that little tiny volume so that it can't really get the volume or the oxygen to the tissues that really need it, right? So that's why we really pay attention, and we really want our heart to be able to be nice and full so that it can pump the appropriate volume that it's supposed to. So that's one part of our problem. The other part of our problem is if our heart isn't working at all, then we have some other big problems, but that can cause a shock-like kind of state where it's just kind of quivering, and so then it's not really pumping, and so then again you have the problem. The other problem is the hoses, right? Our main goal is always to oxygenate our tissues, right? We want to oxygenate our lungs, we want to oxygenate our brain, we want to oxygenate our heart. Well, if our hoses aren't working, if our hoses have gotten so damaged because of either trauma or infection that's been bouncing around and damaging the tissues in the hoses inside our body, what happens is our hoses start to get stretchy. They vasodilate. So this is like a sock. This is one of my son's socks, his old ones, right? That's all stretched out. It's not going to do its job anymore, right? We all like our brand new socks. I don't know about you guys at Christmas when you get your brand new socks and you put them on and they're nice and tight and they fit nice and warm and snug. That's how we want our vessels to be, is like those nice socks. No holes, not thin, not leaking anything through. But when we get shock, what happens is our socks become old and thin, and they have holes in them, so they start leaking fluids out, and then they get holes. They become so stretched out that you can't really pump through them, and that's called vasodilation, where everything they just dilate out and then they stretch and then they become big and holy and things just leak out of them, and so our fluid leaves our vascular system into that interstitial fluid, and we get third spacing. That's why with a lot of our patients we see a lot of fluid excess but not in the vascular space, so we see that pressure drop. Our body's going to do a couple things to try and compensate for this. It's one, going to create that heart rate to start skyrocketing up because it's trying to pump more volume out, but it doesn't realize that once it starts pumping out too little volume, it's not going to actually be effective. The other thing is we really want to start causing some vasoconstriction, and we want to get volume back into that vascular space. So that makes sense in the nursing world of the things that we're going to start doing. So we're going to start giving like vasopressors to start causing that constriction. We're also going to start giving mass amounts of fluid volume to get into that vascular space to keep perfusing our organs, because our organs are kind of funny. Again, if they don't get oxygen, they don't work really well. So what's it going to look like when somebody's in shock? Well, they're going to get pale, right? It's going to look like somebody's having perfusion issues. So think about all the things that we've gone through about what for perfusion, what's not working, right? So they're going to be pale. They may be diaphoretic. They may be really tacky, their pulse rate going up. Sometimes you've heard people say a thready pulse. So when you take their pulse, it's real thready and it's just weak and you can't really feel it, but it's there. Other things you might see is loss of consciousness. As the brain starts getting less oxygen to it, they're going to start being incoherent. They may start mumbling. You may be hard to arouse. You may have to do some really big things to try and wake them up. So that's kind of one of the things that you might see. You might see if they're bleeding, where the blood is coming from. And that could be a big issue as well. We need to stop that bleeding. Otherwise, they're going to keep losing that volume. So what are we going to do about it? We get upon someone who's in shock. It doesn't matter what kind of shock they're in. Our things are, for the start, are going to be the same, right? We are going to lower them to the ground, because the biggest thing, like I said, there's 3 organs that we want to perfuse: heart, lungs, and brain, okay? 3 organs that we want to perfuse. So what we have to do is we've got to lay someone flat. Sometimes you'll see people get put in like Trendelenburg, where we're putting their head way down. If we have a bed, that's great. But if you're out at the park, you may not have that. So you want to get them laying down, maybe in their legs up, because what you're doing is you're pulling that blood from the legs to the heart, to the brain, to the lungs, to perfuse the organs that are vital for life at that moment. Other things we might be doing is we're going to stop the blood flow. We need to get help. We need to get them where they need to be. Okay? We're going to continue to assess them and see what's going on. Once we get them into a hospital or into a facility, we're going to start treating the reason that they're in shock. So if they're hypovolemic, we're going to add volume. If they're bleeding out and hemorrhagic, like a spleen laceration or something like that, we're going to take them to surgery and we're going to fix that. And then we're probably going to replace blood. If they're septic, we're going to start dumping in antibiotics, but hopefully not before we get blood cultures and get some volume on board. So those are some things that we're going to be looking at. Other things that we look at when people are in shock, we like to look at lab values. So again, lactate becomes really important when people are in shock, is seeing how much tissue damage there is. We might want to run a CBC and look at how much blood volume they have or what their white count's looking like. We might want to look at their electrolytes and see, were they a person that was out in the sandhills or out in the desert and got really dehydrated for a long period of time, or their electrolytes all out of whack. So there's a lot of causes that can cause shock, but it's really important that we figure out the cause once we're in the hospital. When we're outside the hospital, in a facility, whatever it is, our focus is just life-sustaining and then get them to where they need to be. So think of those kinds of orders of how are we going to do things. You go in, you recognize something's wrong, and you have to start making a plan quickly based on what you see that's wrong, and that prioritization becomes really important. Then we're going to get them transferred to, we're going to do an action, we're going to get them stabilized as much as we can, and then we're going to get them transferred to the level of care that they need to be. So think of those things as you're working with patients in your facilities or in your clinics, because honestly, shock can happen anywhere and at any time. So what's this going to look like when we put it all together? Raya, you don't look like you're feeling very good. She's not really answering any questions. Raya? Oh my gosh, that's a lot of blood. Raya, are you okay? Hey, are you... She has a pulse. Oh, let's get you down. And the biggest thing that's always important is to get their legs up high. You want to get blood and perfusion to the main organs, the brain, the lungs, and the heart. Raya, are you okay? Where are you bleeding? I'm going to put some pressure on that. Hey, Peter, can you go get some help? Good. So in case anyone thought that this wasn't really a water balloon, I did bring my lovely assistant back, who is feeling fine now, to help me demonstrate that An effective balloon is like effective volume in the heart, and we want it to be effective because effective is fun. Ready? Have a good day and have fun learning about shock.